35th state looking at it. 34 other states have some have done a good job and some have messed up. And so we've been able to see what didn't work in other states and fix that, and see what did work in other states and apply that. So that made our job easier. But really what drove us the most was listening to the potential patients across Mississippi, talking to doctors across Mississippi, and having their input. And that was very helpful and very powerful. And the stories, I don't have any life experience with medical marijuana, but as I listen to these stories, it's powerful and moving. And as a parent, you hear somebody that is a mother that will do anything to help their child stop having seizures. I mean, we can all relate to that. I don't know if there's anything more excruciating than that. And the lady that filed this petition with 220,000 signatures is a mother of a child that was having those seizures. Listen to Ashley's story today. It's the first time I heard that. I appreciate you sharing that, Ashley. That's moving. At the other end of the spectrum of life, we're going to end up being caregivers for our parents. And Marilyn Tinn's example of her mother is powerful to me. You want your parents to end life with dignity, to be in the moment, to not have the only option being a drug, an opioid that isn't as good an option. People in other states have access to medical marijuana. I'd say we don't have a veteran here today. We could. That's been a very powerful example for me. I think of Mississippi veterans that go overseas to defend my freedom, and they come back with a debilitating medical condition. And in other states, they've got the freedom to have access to medical marijuana. And in Mississippi, they don't. The options are opioids, which you can get addicted to and die from. And they tell me that their brothers and sisters in other states that have access to medical marijuana, it saved their life. I mean, if they had a track of opioids, that leads to problems, to suicide. We know that about 20 veterans every day commit suicide. So the example of veterans stands out to me. I don't know how, if somebody goes and fights for me overseas, and they come back here to Mississippi, I can stand in the way of them having access to medical marijuana. I think we're all familiar with the example of cancer patients that need access to it because the treatments are so rigorous and brutal, chemotherapy and treating nausea. I think that's familiar to everybody. And I tell you, I talk to oncologists too that treat those cancer patients, and they tell me that for the patients that want to treat their condition, they have access to it. I mean, you can go right one block here on State Street and have access to it. And that got me thinking, what you get right here on State Street, that's a street drug. It's coming through drug dealers. That's unsafe. And so we need to have a safe product for people that they have in other states. So all these examples I'm giving, in 34 other states, those folks are patients and have access to safe medical marijuana. In Mississippi, we don't. And that's a problem. That's not right. And we're going to change it. And the polling shows that Mississippians want to change it. 80% of Mississippians support medical marijuana. 80%. And I'm a conservative Republican. Republicans support it. It's a conservative issue. 3 out of 4 Republicans in the poll support medical marijuana. And that's powerful. And most Republicans you talk to, they get it. I mean, the reason I'm a Republican is I'm for freedom. They want people to have access to medical marijuana. So how do we do that? How do we do it in Initiative 65A? Initiative 65, excuse me, not the alternative. Jamie went over it pretty well, so I'm not going to go through each point, but I do want to make this point. For Mississippians on the ballot in November, the only conservative, restrictive approach to medical marijuana on the ballot is Initiative 65, not the alternative. Our approach is for medical marijuana, and I hear, people they wonder, is this going to be a slippery slope to recreational? This is not recreational, this is medical marijuana. It's going to be in the Constitution, so it's not going to be changed. But let me go through a few points about Initiative 65 to kind of prove the point that it's the conservative option on the ballot. Number one, on Initiative 65, you do have to go through a medical doctor, not the case for the alternative. In the initiative, you got to have an in-person examination, not the case for the alternative. You saw a list of the 22 named diseases. They have to be identified by that medical doctor, not the case, not defined in the alternative. And we do have a provision in there, since this is going in the Constitution, saying 20 years, doctors discover another disease or identify another disease that is the same class as these 22 named diseases. Well, they'll have the ability, doctors will, to say this is the same symptoms and can be treated with medical marijuana. We leave that to doctors. We don't leave that to politicians. How's it funded? You know, for conservatives on every issue, that's a big deal. There can be some Mississippians that don't support this, and that's fine, and their tax dollars shouldn't have to go to. There are initiatives funded by user fees, and in the alternative, it's funded with general fund dollars. Lawsuit protection. Say you're an employer and you don't believe in medical marijuana, or you want a drug test, and you want to hire and fire who you want, you've got a constitutional protection as an employer against lawsuits. Same thing for schools. If you want a drugs test, and it's not going to impact any university or school's policies. And even property owners. Say you're a landlord and you've got a tenant, you don't approve of that, being in an apartment complex, you can have control of your property and that be protected from lawsuits. Or you don't want anybody to come on your property that's used medical marijuana. That's okay. So if you're a Mississippian that doesn't want to fund this, and you don't want to threat of a lawsuit, and this is Initiative 65 is the option for you. I'll just take a couple other points. Zoning, medical marijuana treatment centers can't be within 500 feet of a school or a church. Impaired driving explicitly prohibited in our initiative. Public smoking, we're all against. That's explicitly illegal. All these things I'm listing are silent in the alternative. And we mentioned the word regulation, I think somebody counted 33 times. So this initiative 65 is about strict regulation. It's a conservative approach, whereas the alternative is an undefined measure. And so the only conservative measure on the ballot is Initiative 65. Really, for that reason, in the polls, it shows that Mississippians prefer Initiative 65 by a margin of 2-1. And I think that's one of the reasons Mississippians are compassionate people. They want to help, and they also want a restricted conservative program. So this gives it to them. So I'm excited about this. It's been a privilege to be a part of it, be included in it. And with each passing week, I hear more stories like I've heard today from Maryland and Ashley. And I can feel momentum out there. Mississippians are for medical marijuana and for a conservative approach. And we're going to do the 35th state to join the rest of the country. And so thank you for your time for being here today.